January 17th, 1940. North Atlantic, 400 miles west of Scotland. A wall of gray water crashes over the bow of a British freighter, its hull groaning against the relentless swells. Below the surface, unseen and unheard, steel predators circle in silence. The ocean stretches endlessly in every direction, a battlefield without borders, without mercy. This is the Atlantic in winter. And for the next 5 years, it will never know peace. From the evening of Sunday, September 3rd, 1939, to the evening of Monday, May 7th, 1945, the Battle of the Atlantic raged without pause. Spanning 3 continents and an unforgiving expanse of ocean, it became the longest and most grueling campaign of the entire war. There were no epic clashes like Trafalgar or Midway, no single decisive moment. Instead, it was a grinding war of attrition, a struggle to protect supply lines and keep Britain alive. The German Navy struck with changing tactics and weapons, while Allied strategy remained constant: survive, endure, deliver. Yet this campaign has been largely forgotten. Few remember that the fate of Western freedom hung on its outcome. If the Atlantic lifelines had been severed, Britain would have starved. American and Canadian forces could not have joined the fight. Soviet armies would have been denied vital tanks and aircraft. The liberation of Europe, the very defeat of the Axis, would have been impossible. Winston Churchill understood this better than anyone. The Battle of the Atlantic, he said, was the dominating factor all through the war. Never for one moment could we forget that everything happening elsewhere, on land, at sea, or in the air, depended ultimately on its outcome. For nearly the entire struggle, the Allies remained on the defensive while the Kriegsmarine struck with a lethal array of weapons: warships, auxiliary cruisers, submarines, and long-range bombers. The Germans wasted no time. 8 hours after Britain and France declared war on Nazi Germany, Lieutenant Fritz Lemp's U-30 torpedoed the British liner Athenia 250 miles west of Ireland. 128 people died, including 22 Americans. The sinking violated international law and triggered worldwide outrage. Within the first 2 weeks, 27 British merchant ships went down. By year's end, 216 had been lost, totaling 748,000 tons. In the first year alone, 438 merchant vessels were sunk. For an island nation importing half its food, much of its metal, and all its oil, the losses were catastrophic. The Kriegsmarine also hunted warships. On September 17th, U-29 sank the aircraft carrier HMS Courageous off southwestern Ireland. The Royal Navy withdrew its carriers from anti-submarine patrols, but the damage to morale was severe. Then came the most shocking blow. On October 14th, Lieutenant Gunther Preen slipped his U-47 into the Royal Navy's fortress anchorage at Scapa Flow and torpedoed the battleship HMS Royal Oak. 786 men died. If the Royal Navy had been caught unprepared, the Admiralty responded swiftly. It revived the convoy system that had saved Britain in the First World War. The first convoy sailed for Halifax on September 7th. Escorts shepherded merchantmen 300 miles out to sea, then turned back to guide inbound convoys home. The pattern was born from necessity. The Navy had too few escort vessels. German surface raiders roamed the Atlantic, forcing the Admiralty to assign heavy escorts to each convoy. These raiders were more distraction than strategic threat, but they exacted a toll. The pocket battleship Deutschland sank 2 merchantmen and seized the American freighter city of Flint, inflaming anti-German sentiment in the United States. The most destructive raider, the Admiral Graf Spee, sank 9 ships totaling 50,000 tons before being cornered in Montevideo Harbor. Captain Hans Langsdorff scuttled his ship rather than face the Royal Navy cruisers waiting outside. Britain had scored its first front-page victory. The celebration was brief. Long-range Focke-Wulf Condor bombers would sink 580,000 tons of shipping in 1940. But the true menace lurked beneath the waves. The British remembered how German submarines had nearly starved them into surrender in the last war. The main ocean-going U-boats, Types 7 and 9, displaced 700 to 1,100 tons and could range between 6,500 and 13,450 miles. With surface speeds of 17 to 19 knots, they could catch merchant vessels and outrun many escorts. Leading them was Admiral Karl Donitz, who had commanded submarines in the Mediterranean during the Great War and been captured near Malta in 1918. He told Hitler that 300 U-boats could choke off British commerce and force surrender within 6 months. Hitler dismissed the claim. His priorities were the army and the Luftwaffe. Germany entered the war with just 56 submarines, only 22 operational at any time. Yet these few boats sank 199 merchantmen and a third of the Royal Navy's battleship strength in the war's first months. The Royal Navy, dominated by battleship admirals, had neglected destroyers and smaller escort craft. Many early escorts were converted trawlers, ill-suited for the brutal Atlantic. Still, the Admiralty took control of merchant shipping and ordered vessels under 15 knots to sail in convoy. Faster ships sailed alone. By the end of 1939, the Navy had escorted nearly 5,800 merchantmen with the loss of only 12 4 U-boats. During the same period, 102 independent ships were sunk. Dönitz lost 9 boats, nearly a sixth of his strength. Churchill ordered merchantmen armed. The Germans responded with minefields in North Sea harbors and estuaries. The British laid undeclared minefields of their own. Hitler lifted restrictions on U-boat operations. Dönitz's submarines faced challenges reaching their hunting grounds in the western approaches. Barred from the English Channel by mines across the Dover Strait, they had to circle far around Scotland. Fuel constraints limited their time on station. During the harsh winter of 1939-40, rarely more than 10 U-boats patrolled the western approaches. Then came spring 1940. The Germans overran Norway, the Low Countries, and France. Dönitz established heavily fortified bases on the French Atlantic coast at Brest, Lorient-Saint-Nazaire, La Pallice, and Bordeaux. Transit time to the hunting grounds was cut in half. The RAF, focused on raids over Germany, failed to disrupt construction of the concrete pins. They became virtually impregnable. U-boats began operating from French bases in July 1940. With 27 Italian submarines joining them at Bordeaux, Dönitz concentrated his strength 260 miles west of Scotland and deployed Wolfpack tactics for the first time. The Admiralty ordered new destroyers, corvettes, and frigates. These vessels, aided by trawlers and small craft, bore the brunt of escort duties. But losses were heavy during the Norwegian campaign and the Dunkirk evacuation. With Britain threatened by invasion, escorts were stripped from ocean convoys. Some sailed with a single escort. Churchill requested 50 mothballed American destroyers from President Roosevelt. In September, a deal was struck, the World War I era four-stackers in exchange for 99-year leases on British bases in the West Indies, Bermuda, and Newfoundland. Sinkings mounted. From June to October 1940, the U-boat's Happy Time, 274 merchant ships were lost. Dönitz pack sank 196,000 tons in July, 268,000 in August, 295,000 in September, and 352,000 in October. One slow convoy in October lost 21 of 30 ships. Another lost 12 of 49. The Admiralty extended westward escort limits. 4 or 5 weeks late in 1940, convoys went unmolested. But U-boat skippers preferred easy kills, independent merchantmen, and those losses soared. In the mid-Atlantic, single ships were most vulnerable. Land-based planes from Britain and Canada could not reach a broad stretch of the central North Atlantic, the Black Pit. There, the U-boats reaped a rich harvest. As escorts reached farther west, Dönitz's Wolfpack struck convoys. The most devastating attack came on October 18, 1940, when Lieutenant Commander Otto Kretschmer's U-99 and 6 other boats penetrated a convoy screen and sank 18 merchantmen. Days later, Lieutenant Preen's U-47 and 5 boats torpedoed 13 ships, then met another convoy and sank 7 more. Dönitz had high hopes, but his limited numbers and resupply needs prevented sustained attrition. Only half a dozen U-boats patrolled off Ireland in late 1940. Heavy weather hampered their efforts. Losses from submarine attacks declined to 180,000 tons monthly. Construction barely covered the loss of 31 U-boats since the war began. Hitler, expecting British capitulation, had slowed U-boat production. Early 1941 brought a turning point. On March 7th, U-47 was sunk by HMS Wolverine, and Preen was killed. 2 more U-boats were destroyed on March 15th. Dönitz postponed his spring offensive. May brought 2 major developments. An escort force stationed in Newfoundland closed the mid-Atlantic gap. Then came an intelligence coup. When Lieutenant Lemp's damaged 110 surrendered, the British captured an Enigma machine, signal log, and spare rotors. By June, the Admiralty could read messages between Dönitz and his officers. Combined with radar, the capture of a German weather ship, and improved ASTIC underwater sound location equipment, the Allies could now track enemy submarines. The balance was shifting. The Western Approaches Command in Liverpool introduced new escort tactics, upgraded anti-submarine weapons, depth charges, mortars, rockets, and deployed long-range aircraft, particularly B-24 Liberators and short Sunderland flying boats. New escort vessels joined the workhorse corvettes. U.S. Navy destroyers began escorting convoys to Iceland in September 1941. The Royal Canadian Navy's escort fleet grew to more than 400 corvettes and destroyers. Meanwhile, Royal Navy units hunted German surface ships. In May 1941, after the battlecruiser HMS Hood was sunk, the battleships King George V and Rodney and the cruiser Dorsetshire hunted down and destroyed the Bismarck. German surface incursions into the Atlantic ended. A month after Pearl Harbor and Germany's declaration of war on America, Donitz launched Operation Drumbeat. 5 long-range U-boats sailed to the unprepared U.S. East Coast. On the night of January 13, 1942, their crews were amazed to see merchant ships fully lit, silhouetted by the glow of New York, Atlantic City, and Miami. Blackouts had not been imposed to protect tourism. The ships were easy targets. Surfacing by night, the U-boats attacked with deck guns and torpedoes. Bathers on beaches watched freighters and tankers burn. By month's end, 13 ships were sunk. Admiral Ernest King refused British advice to form convoys. Under pressure from Army Chief of Staff George Marshall, King finally established a convoy system in May 1942. Meanwhile, U-boats sank 17 ships in February and 28 in March without a single loss. Washington ordered an East Coast blackout in April. When only 6 ships were sunk in May, U-boats moved to the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico, destroying Brazilian freighters and Venezuelan oil tankers. During 6 months of Operation Drumbeat, 400 ships went down in U.S. waters. 5,000 Allied lives were lost. In May and June 1942, U-boats sank more than 1 million tons in the North Atlantic. Donitz now had his 300 submarines. Convoys were ambushed in the Black Pit. Losses reached 700,000 tons in November. Churchill feared Britain might lose the Battle of the Atlantic. But it was no new, happy time for the Germans. 40 U-boats have been sunk since the year's start. An estimated 3,700 officers and men were dead or captured. The tide was turning. By August 1942, the British and Canadians had 150 destroyers, nearly 200 corvettes, 30 sloops, and new frigates on convoy duty. Americans deployed new escorts. By year's end, 4 Jeep carriers provided air cover. Victory came through industrial attrition. British Commonwealth yards produced 1 million tons of shipping annually. American yards produced 6 million. Henry Kaiser's assembly lines turned out 60 Liberty ships monthly in 1942 and 140 in 1943. One was built in less than 4 days. More Allied ships were being built than U-boats could sink. After more than 3 years, the Allies took the offensive. Admiral Horton formed support groups of 6 to 8 destroyers, frigates, or corvettes to rush aid to embattled convoys. Long-range B-24s and Sunderlands could now reach all parts of the North Atlantic from bases in Newfoundland, Iceland, and Northern Ireland. By late spring 1943, the Allies had the advantage. 41 U-boats were destroyed in May, more than in the war's first 3 years. The Germans called it Black May. From April through June, 100 U-boats were sunk. RAF Coastal Command bombers operating from southwestern England sank 7 U-boats in the Bay of Biscay in May. 9 were sunk in the last week of July. Between May and year's end, 32 U-boats went down in Biscay waters. By July, Allied merchant tonnage launched exceeded losses for the first time. Operational U-boats were declining. Monthly sinkings of Allied vessels fell below 100,000 tons for the rest of the war. Donitz admitted privately, "We had lost the Battle of the Atlantic." Hitler stormed, "There can be no let-up in submarine warfare. The Atlantic is my first line of defense in the West." Over the next months, 62 merchant convoys crossed with no losses. The Allies used convoys to lure and destroy U-boats with hunter-killer groups. By autumn 1943, the U-boat was sunk for every freighter torpedoed. Donitz deployed acoustic torpedoes that homed on escort propellers. In September, U-boats struck 2 convoys, sinking 3 escorts and 6 freighters. The Allies countered with trailing Fokker noisemakers that drew the torpedoes harmlessly away. Donitz pinned last hopes on revolutionary Walter U-boats, but only 6 became operational. A few U-boats attacked convoys until February 1944, suffering heavy losses while inflicting slight damage. With close surface and air support, Allied convoys were virtually immune. After D-Day, U-boats ceased using French ports. The Soviet westward drive expelled them from the Baltic. They operated only from Norway. On May 7, 1945, Donitz surrendered unconditionally. That evening, Lieutenant Emil Klusmir disobeyed orders and sank the Canadian steamer Avondale Park and the Norwegian tramp Sneelandai. 23 seamen died. The German submarine service ended as it began, with the destruction of defenseless ships. The casualties were appalling. An estimated 2,800 Allied merchantmen, 148 warships, and 1,700 coastal command aircraft were lost. About 83,000 sailors, seamen, and airmen were killed. Of 863 U-boats committed, 754 were destroyed. Of nearly 41,000 men who serve in the Iron Coffins, 27,491 died, the highest per capita toll of any combat force in World War II. Despite their hardships and sacrifice, and though the U-boat threat was never completely defeated, the Allies prevailed. Merchant ships successfully completed more than 300,000 voyages across the Atlantic. The lifeline held. Britain survived, and the world was saved.